To be here today with Cantor Evan Kent, who served for 25 years at Temple Isaiah in Los Angeles and is an Ola Chadash, a new immigrant in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, where he is on the faculty of the HUC Cantorial School. So thanks for taking some time to talk.
Thank you for having me.
So to start, what has your Aliyah journey been like?
Well, we're in Israel 5.5 years. It's been good. It's basically good. We live in Jerusalem, right in the center of the city. I love Jerusalem. It's a vibrant, actually very pluralistic city. I love the fact that the holidays happen. It's an amazing, after serving a congregation for so many years and facilitating sort of the happening for other people, Jerusalem sort of happens. It's a very wonderful place to live. One of the best things is I have about a 10-minute walking commute to my office at Hebrew Union College, which is terrific. I will say that after about the first year of our what we call our Aliyah anniversaries, when the Gaza war began, which was sort of a tough time, not having ever experienced anything like that, certainly living in the United States, either in New York or California, and that really was sort of the beginning of my own personal journey that sort of culminated in the show that I'm presenting here in Phoenix this weekend. Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of that show, I know one of your passions and talents is storytelling.
Correct.
So, why do you tell stories?
Why do I tell stories? I think, I sort of classified, actually not me, but Panina Shram, who's a very well-known storyteller, and some other people have classified Jewish stories sort of into folk tales. Both sort of Middle Eastern folk tales, Mizrahi folk tales, Sephardic folk tales, Eastern European folk tales. And then we also have sort of rabbinic tales, Midrash and Agadah. And then I really tell the kind of stories which we call personal stories, which are sort of stories from my own life and stories from the lives of my ancestors, stories from other people that I know. I tell these stories because I think what happens is that in storytelling, when you're telling a good story and you're a good storyteller, right, that I'm telling a very specific story, but at the same time, people understand it as reflecting upon their own lives. Right. And after I tell a story, for example, in my show, I tell a story about my great-grandmother, and people come up to me afterwards and they said, "You were telling the story of your grandmother, but it could have been my grandmother." And that's when you know that the story has succeeded, because there's a universality to what you're telling.
Very powerful. Why do you think stories are important for Jews at large?
Well, I think we're a storytelling people. Yeah. I mean, I think, we say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Once upon a time in Ahasuerus' kingdom. I mean, my father was a wandering Aramean. All of our liturgy is basically storytelling. Yeah. And we're following, our stories follow both people and sort of the whole Jewish people. Right. And I think that's sort of fascinating. Some of the greatest storytelling takes place in Torah, in Talmud, but I think some of the most profound storytelling takes place, we know, when kids sit in the kitchen with their grandmothers, when grandma making soup, making matzo balls, making whatever she's making, or whatever grandpa is making, not to be sexist, but then when they tell me about your life wherever, and that's where I think truth happens, is in those moments.
So as a cantor, what do you see as the relationship between music and storytelling?
I think song is another form of storytelling. One of the amazing things about storytelling is, actually, of almost any performance, storytelling or song, is that when I tell you a story, you go with me. The listener almost always goes with me, and our mind, it's a sort of an amazing neurological thing that happens, is the mind stops saying, "Oh, this can't be true," or "This is nonsense," and it lets you go, which is one of the reasons, which is one of my best examples of that, is that when you go to see, like, say, a horror movie, you want to say, "Get out of the house, run away," but on one level you know it's not true, and on the other level your brain says, this is actually happening. And that's really good storytelling, is where you can sort of submerge yourself in the moment.
Yeah. So, we sometimes distinguish between history and memory. And I wonder if story is a third layer to that. History, we attempt to have some sort of objective recounting based on documentation and the like. Memory, we know from developmental psychology that it's not like a database where you stick something and then you pull it out pure. it's constantly reconstructed.
Correct.
Right? And it seems like story is another layer where we actively are reconstructing, as opposed to sort of passively, subconsciously.
And you know, that's fascinating that memory is actually a construct.
Yeah.
But storytelling is exactly that. It's another layer of this construct, because every time I tell that story, it changes. It's never the same, which is the difference between my own personal storytelling and, let's say, somebody who's doing monologues.
Right.
I always sort of know where I'm going, but in that moment, something always happens. And sometimes whole paragraphs of the story drop out. And I've learned from my storytelling mentors that that's okay.
Right.
It's okay to be that way. But storytelling always is a very sort of permeable and movable medium, which is why I like it. It's sort of it allows you to react to the audience. They react to you.
It's an amazing thing about learning, because when I publicly speak, I'll have a range of things I do. We study a text, we do a chavruta, partnered learning, we'll do maybe a song even. But the thing that everyone always remembers after are the 2 or 3 stories I tell.
Correct.
It's an amazing thing about learning that it's like you said, it's almost like immersive. You immerse your consciousness within this story.
Which is probably why Talmud is just filled with stories, because they're illustrative. You could have had Talmud would have been just a few short volumes, and because if it was a list of laws, but the stories are there to sort of guide us and sort of help to sort of figure out. We have to read those stories.
And they were kind of marginalized. I mean, my understanding is that about 3/4 of the Talmud is halakha and about 1/4 is agadah.
Correct. Yeah.
And everyone's struggling in the relationship, but many people know the famous rules or legal debates. How many people know all the famous stories that emerge? It's kind of a lost art, and I think a lot of the Hasidic rabbis kind of reformed the power of storytelling in many ways. Rabbi Nachman, for example, So I guess my last question for you would be, how transformative can this be if we start to think of our life as a story, interwoven with other people's stories of the past and of the present and of the future, that we're immersed also in a tradition of stories, as opposed to, and it doesn't have to be opposed to this or that, but as opposed to a system of rules or a system of ethics or a culture, that we are a storytelling people. I wonder what that looks like. What does that change for our self-identity and our collective identity?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think what it does is sort of having this sort of constant storytelling thing, and Jewish storytelling is different. I read a story that there's this one very well-known Jewish storyteller, and he had seen a storyteller from the British Isles, and he said, I want to tell sort of like Scottish and Irish stories. And after about a week of trying it, he said it doesn't fit. So Jewish stories have a sort of unique tom to them. I think what storytelling does for Jews is that it gives us culture. It should give us midot. It should give us ways to behave. But I think more than that, sort of in sort of a meta category, it allows us to write in some ways our own Torah. I think what we do is that we realize that our lives are sort of part. If we all stood at Sinai, this storytelling is this continuation of Sinai.
Right. Love that. On this point of midot, I think that. The great crisis of our time is the absence of empathy. And it seems to me that stories are able to cultivate that in a very powerful way. By like you say, constructing our own Torah, by cultivating spiritual imagination, intellectual, moral imagination, as opposed to just memorizing rules that society tells us. So I think that that's a wonderful art, and you should continue to be blessed in all the wonderful work you do.
Thank you.
And to be teaching and modeling storytelling, which can be truly transformative.
Thank you so much. Thanks.